Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the incredibly complex legal arguments and the wild evidentiary revelations coming out of the highly publicized David Anthony Burke Preliminary Hearing. We're drawing directly from some fantastic recent analysis by the Law and Crime Network, really zooming in on the insights of private investigator Steve Fisher, a guy who's literally been tracking this case from day one. We're going to methodically map out the state's allegations, the defense's early counters, and the really intense courtroom dynamics surrounding the tragic death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Look, it's a heavy, complicated case for sure. But by laying it all out step by step, we can cut through the noise and look directly at what's actually being argued in a court of law.
Okay, let's kick things off with the explosive courtroom drama that set the tone before things even officially started. Picture this. You're sitting in court, waiting for things to get underway, and suddenly, lead prosecutor Beth Silverman just storms down the hallway. She spots PI Steve Fisher, who, remember, represents the owner of the property where the defendant was staying, chatting with the victim's family attorney. According to Fisher's own account in our source material, Silverman straight up demanded he be kicked out of the courtroom. She accused him of breaking grand jury secrecy laws and even threatened to have an arrest warrant issued right then and there. Now, the judge eventually clarified she couldn't actually intervene in grand jury issues, and Fisher voluntarily stepped out. But wow, that interaction sets an incredibly tense stage, right? It really highlights the astronomical stakes here and just how fiercely the prosecution is guarding their case.
To really navigate this case, we've got to break down the exact charges Burke is facing. It's a multi-tiered legal battle. The state is hitting him with continuous sexual abuse of a minor, unlawful mutilation of human remains, and first-degree murder, but with special circumstances attached. Now, before we look at the evidence the state claims to have for each of these, it is absolutely crucial to remember that these are strictly allegations. In our justice system, the defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Our goal here today is just to explain the framework of the prosecution's argument and how the defense is responding.
The legal threshold here is super fascinating, and honestly, it's something anyone following the justice system really needs to grasp. Keep in mind, this was a preliminary hearing, not the full trial. The judge only needed to see enough probable cause to move the case forward. That's a much lower bar than proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This basically means the prosecution didn't have to lay all their cards on the table. They just needed to present the bare minimum to cross that line. It's a strategic preview. So, as observers trying to wrap our heads around this, we've really only seen a tiny fraction of the evidence they might be holding back.
And you know, this strategy was perfectly illustrated when LA County District Attorney Nathan Hochman openly told the press that what we've seen is basically just the tip of the iceberg. What really made legal analysts sit up and take notice was his mention of recipient witnesses. That specific phrasing, it implies there are people out there who allegedly have direct knowledge of the events. Maybe someone who heard a confession or knew about the crime as it was happening. The prosecution is actively, deliberately withholding these key testimonies for the actual trial, where that burden of proof finally shifts to beyond a reasonable doubt.
Let's move into Charge 1, continuous sexual abuse, which legal analysts consider the prosecution's strongest evidentiary front.
The core of this charge revolves around the horrific allegation of an illicit relationship with a minor, which the prosecution states began when Celeste was just 13 years old. Now, during the hearing, the defense kind of floated the idea that Celeste might have lied to the defendant about her age, but the prosecution shut that down fast, pointing out that under the law, a minor lying about their age or an adult claiming they didn't know absolutely does not absolve the adult of legal liability.
When you look at the data, the evidentiary picture is heavily weighted against the defense. The prosecution presented digital media allegedly pulled right off the defendant's phone, including some highly graphic photos and text messages discussing abortion. On top of that, they brought in evidence that a West Hollywood sheriff's deputy had explicitly warned Burke that Celeste was a 13-year-old runaway. That severely undercuts any defense claim of ignorance. The state also alleges a deliberate pattern of contact, claiming Burke actually passed phones to Celeste through her classmates to bypass restrictions. So between the digital footprint and the witness warnings, it's a very difficult evidentiary mountain for the defense to climb. So, what's the defense's play here? According to the Law and Crime Network analysis, their strategy actually involves acknowledging the inappropriate relationship, but completely reframing it. During closing arguments, they reportedly argued that the defendant was quote-unquote in love with her. Now, why on earth would they admit that? Well, it's a strategic legal move. If they concede he cared for her, they can try to argue that the tragic death was a chaotic, unplanned confrontation, like a crime of passion or a heat-of-the-moment reaction, rather than a cold, calculated, premeditated execution.
That narrative transition brings us right into Charge 2, unlawful mutilation of remains, and the bizarre, complex cover-up that allegedly followed.
Let's trace the timeline the prosecution laid out. They allege the murder happened on April 23, 2025. What comes next is a really disturbing 12-day window packed with suspicious activity. Tracking data from phones and the defendant's Tesla allegedly places the car in a remote part of Santa Barbara on the night of the 23rd. Then again on May 5th, right around Cinco de Mayo, and then a third time on May 8th. The prosecution claims the vehicle smelled heavily of decomposition, arguing these multiple late-night trips to an isolated road were specifically to dispose of evidence and human remains.
The state's list of alleged concealment tools is extensive and pretty grim. They claim Burke used an established alias, Trayvon Davis, to order disturbing cleanup supplies. We're talking 2 chainsaws, a mop system, cadaver bags, and a blue inflatable pool. The prosecution pointed out that the pool, which was found in Burke's garage, had cuts in it, and incredibly, blue plastic fragments matching that exact pool were reportedly found embedded in Celeste's remains. Add to that the staggering detail of 11 air fresheners allegedly found inside the Tesla, and the gruesome fact that the victim's left ring finger, which had a tattoo of the defendant's name, was missing. The state argues this was a deliberate attempt to obscure her identity.
But wait, if we look at the dueling narratives, the defense pushes back hard on this. They argue these items absolutely were not a murder kit, but just props bought for a music video shoot. And they made a really significant point at the hearing. The 2 chainsaws recovered from the house actually tested negative for blood. On top of that, the medical examiner couldn't definitively say what tool was used because of the state of the remains, and the defense was super quick to highlight that the state hasn't even found the true murder weapon. There are rumors floating around of a third, missing chainsaw, but for now, the defense is zeroing in on these glaring evidentiary gaps.
Now we arrive at Charge 3, first-degree murder. This is where we analyze the absolute highest stakes of the trial.
The prosecution hasn't just charged him with murder. They've attached what are called special circumstances. These are major legal enhancements that can skyrocket the severity of the penalty, potentially all the way to life without parole or even the death penalty. The state is claiming Burke literally lay in wait for her. They allege he killed her because she was a witness to his ongoing statutory sexual abuse and that he did it for financial gain to protect his career and assets, knowing she had allegedly threatened to ruin him.
We are essentially looking at 2 completely opposite versions of what happened on April 23rd. The prosecution's theory paints Burke as a calculated predator who lured his victim over, executed a premeditated attack, and then, after she was dead, texted her phone just to create a false trail of innocence. On the flip side, the defense theory suggests she invited herself over. They point out that right before she got there, Burke was allegedly just playing virtual reality video games and texted her that the door was unlocked. They argue, hey, that is not the behavior of a guy rehearsing an execution. They're suggesting a violent altercation erupted the second she arrived, maybe even involving self-defense, which ended in a tragic, heat-of-the-moment death.
So here is the big question, the absolute crux of the murder charge. Did the defendant act with cold, calculated premeditation? Or will a jury look at the lack of a murder weapon, the VR gaming, the sloppy cleanup, and believe this was just a chaotic, heat-of-the-moment struggle that went terribly wrong? The prosecution insists his immediate steps to allegedly cover his tracks prove it was a deliberate plan. This fundamental debate, premeditation versus a frantic reaction, is exactly what's going to decide the final verdict.
Moving on to the road to trial, what exactly happens next in the legal process?
Well, you're going to want to mark your calendars for August 31st. That's the date David Anthony Burke is scheduled for his formal arraignment in court. This is a massive legal checkpoint. It's where the judge's findings from this preliminary hearing solidify, and we'll finally see exactly which of these charges and special enhancements the prosecution officially locks in for the actual trial. It's totally possible some of these charges might get adjusted based on the judge's rulings, so it's a date we are definitely watching.
As we wrap up this explainer, the biggest unknowns are still looming large. We know the prosecution is holding back a significant chunk of their evidence for trial, so when August 31st rolls around and this case moves forward, we're left wondering, what explosive, shocking details will those secret recipient witnesses finally reveal to the jury, and how will that hidden evidence shift the entire balance of justice in this case? We'll just have to wait and see.